Encyclopedia section 475, Finding Purpose, Becoming the Subject, is the act of satisfying impulses. The act of formal rationality translates impulses from the subjectivity of content, which so far is the sought purpose, into the objective of mind signified by haptic memory, becoming static reality. If the content of the impulse is distinguished as the business or haptic memory from the act of carrying it out or establishing it as static reality, and we regard the business or haptic memory which has been brought to pass as static reality, which contains the elements of the purpose seeking individual and his actions, we have arrived at the purpose sought and consider it a consideration worthy of leaving the first and second estate. Nothing, therefore, is brought about without consideration. An action is an aim of the subject, and it is his agency too which executes this aim. Unless the subject were in this way, in the most disinterested action, in essence, unless he had an interest in it, there would be no action at all. Morality is action, and it concerns the content of the aim, which as such is the universal and an active thing that finds its actualizing in the agent, and finds it only when the aim is immanent in the agent, in his interest, and should it claim to engross his whole efficient subjectivity, his passion. Encyclopedia section 476, The will, as thinking and implicitly free, distinguishes itself from the particularity of the impulses and places itself as simple subjectivity of thought above their diversified content. It is thus reflecting will. Encyclopedia section 477, such a particularity of impulse has thus ceased to be a mere datum. The reflective will now sees it as its own, because it closes with it and thus gives itself specific individuality and actuality. It is more on the standpoint of choosing between inclinations and is option or choice. Encyclopedia section 478, Will as choice claims to be free, reflected into itself as the negativity of its merely immediate autonomy. However, as the content in which its former uni- as the content in which its former universality concludes itself to actuality is nothing but the content of the impulses and appetites, it is actually only as a subjective and contingent will. However, as the content in which its former universality concludes itself to actuality is nothing but the content of the impulses and appetite, it is actual only as a subjective and contingent will. It realizes itself in a particularity which it regards at the same time as a nullity and finds in a satisfaction in what it has at the same time emerged from. As thus contradictory, it is the process of distracting and suspending one desire or enjoyment by another, and one satisfaction which is just as much no satisfactions in the universal, which under the name of happiness the thinking will makes its aim. Section 1, Subjective Mind, subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist, super subsection B, Mind, Practical, der praktische Geist, metasection Gamma, Happiness, die Glückseligkeit. Encyclopedia section 479. In this area, which reflection and comparison have educed, of a universal satisfaction, the impulses, so far as their particularity goes, are reduced to a mere negative. And it is held that in part they are to be sacrificed to each other for the behoof of that aim, and partly sacrificed to that aim directly, either altogether or in part. Their mutual limitation, on one hand, proceeds from a mixture of qualitative considerations. On the other hand, as happiness has its sole affirmative content in the springs of action, it is on them that the decision turns, and it is the subjective feeling in good pleasure which must have the casting vote as to where happiness is to be placed. Encyclopedia section 480. Happiness is the mere abstract and merely imagined universality of things desired, a universality which just as much is as it is abolished. The happy ones are in abstract singleness, the option which gives or does not give itself as it pleases. Their aim in happiness is to find their truth in the intrinsic universality of the will, in essence, its very autonomy and freedom. In this way, choice is will only as pure subjectivity, which is pure and concrete at once, but having for its content and aim only that infinite mode of being, freedom itself. In this truth of its autonomy, where concept and object are one, the will is an actually free will and the true good. In summary, gay is good, freedom is the good. Section 1, Subjective Mind, Final Concepts. Free Mind. Der freie Geist. Encyclopedia section 481. Actual free will is the unity of theoretical and practical mind, a free will which realizes its own freedom of will now that the formalism, fortuitousness, and contractedness of the practical content up to this point have been superseded. By superseding the adjustments of means therein contained, the will is the immediate individuality self instituted, an individuality, however, also purified of all that interferes with its universalism, in essence, with liberty itself. This universalism is this universalism in the will has as its object and aim only so far as it thinks itself. This universalism in the will has as its object and aim only so far as it thinks itself, knows this its concept, and is will as free intelligence. A wheel in the middle of a wheel, way up in the middle of the air. A will in the middle of a will, way in the middle of the air. Encyclopedia section 482. The mind which knows itself as free and wills itself as this its object, in essence, which has its true being for characteristic and aim, is in the first instance the rational will in general, or implicit idea. It is existent only in the immediate will. It is the existential side of reason, the single will as aware of this, its universality constituting its contents and aim, and of which it is only the formal activity. If the will, therefore, in which the idea thus appears is only finite, that will is also the act of developing the idea and of investing its self unfolding content with an existence which, as realizing the idea, is actuality. It is thus the objective of the mind. Das Ziel des Geistes. Das Ziel des Geistes. And this is the end of George Hegel, Philosophy of Mind Summary, Section 1, Subjective Mind. The next section will be here. It's titled The Objective Mind, but in reality, it is the objective of the mind, and the objective of the mind is morality.